Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and fellow Masons, it is a great honor and enthusiasm that I welcome you to the Chancellor Robert R. Livingston Masonic Library Live Lectures. This esteemed institution has been steeped in the rich traditions of Freemasonry and has been a beacon of knowledge and enlightenment for the fraternity for almost 175 years. Tonight, we gather in the spirit of curiosity and enlightenment to partake in an engaging lecture that promises to broaden our horizons. So tonight, we have also Brother Cliff, Right Worshipful Cliff Jacobs. He's a past trustee of the Library Museum. Brother Jason Short, past lecturer for us. If I've forgotten, I apologize if anybody else. So at the library, we have literally over 37,000 artifacts. And some of them are very, very important pieces of American history, New York history, and very important Freemasons. We also have over 60,000 books. We have a reading course that has 17 different levels. And it's all free if you're a New York Mason, starting from Entered Apprentice. Anyone could look at any artifact or read any book, Mason or non-Mason. We just don't let you leave the premises unless you're a Mason, you signed up and you signed that you said you're going to return the stuff, okay? We also have a lot of this stuff on digital content, an app called Odillo. Not everything's on there because of copyright issues. We also do genealogy research for New York Masons. If anyone's interested to know if their relative was a Mason and what they were and what lodge they were at, and more information about them, we also do that as well. We also have the entire collection of the American Lodge of Research. That's the American version, and the international version, Ars Quarto Quarto. So if you, at your lodge, want to do a program, you want to know something a little about it, you could go on their website and look up individual lectures. And you could go back to Odillo and find it, or you could call me or Alex, and we can scan it for you and get it out. We also have something that most people don't know. Each lodge has founding documents. It is not your charter. It's a petition and it's a dispensation that happens before your charter. We have about 99% of them. Some are lost from the Civil War through fires and burning and stuff. And but for the most part, we have almost all that stuff. So come visit the lodge on the 14th floor at another time. And to support the library, we are selling lapel pins and challenge cards, which have possibly every version of digital currency you could pay for them, so there's no excuse. And finally, we have our live lectures. Past lectures can be seen on our YouTube channel. And this lecture will be available probably tonight or tomorrow morning as well. Please note that the lectures are the product of lectures and do not necessarily represent the views of the library, its staff, and the Grand Lodge of New York. Tonight's lecture is entitled, The Masons That Made the Tarot. Tarot cards can be found everywhere in modern culture. These are hundreds of decks available all over the world. Despite that popularity, many people are unaware of the history of the deck. In particular, they are unaware of the profound influence which Freemasons have had on their creation. Tonight, we dive into the history of the tarot cards, with special attention paid to those Masons who helped to begin one of the most intriguing modern spiritual traditions. Our lecturer is currently completing his master's degree in Theological Studies with Colgate, Rochester, Crozer, Divinity School. He currently is acting as Junior Masters of Ceremony in his mother lodge, Iraq Lodge, number 154. Please help me welcome Brother Oliver Ash.
Thank you, brother. And can everybody hear me all right?
Yes.
Fantastic. Wow. Thank you all for coming tonight. Our fraternity is certainly singular, I would say. I think very few organizations would give me the opportunity to wax philosophical about a deck of playing cards, but if you will pardon the pun, you play the hand that we are dealt. Now, I would also like to thank the Livingston Library for the opportunity to speak here, as well as my mentor and friend, Rich Friedman, without whom I likely would have taken a much longer and more arduous road to get to this point. Tarot cards are a puzzling conundrum. Next slide, please. Culturally, they seem inescapable. If you go to any bookstore, you will find a whole section containing nothing but tarot cards of various designs and themes. Before coming to New York, I stopped by a spiritual bookstore in my hometown of Rochester, and I counted over 200 unique tarot decks available for sale. There's also books which purport to hold the true meaning of the cards, which all other previous books naturally had been unable to elucidate. And if you leave the bookstore, you go across the street, you go into another place, you might find tarot dresses, earrings, posters, necklaces, notebooks, prayer candles, wall tapestries, make your own tarot kits. And if you find yourself at a certain store in Salem, Massachusetts, you'll find dog biscuits decorated with all of the images from the cards. Now, head on down to the spiritual store. You'll not just find that, you'll find people who are advertising their trade as tarot readers, usually for the low, low price of about $30 an hour, which is considerably better than what I make currently. Despite the profusion of tarot cards and related items in our stores and zeitgeist, there seem to be very few people, outside of those who study this stuff professionally, who are aware of the actual history of this wicked pack of cards. Ask the tarot readers and they'll tell you that the symbolism on the cards dates back to ancient Egypt, or to the medieval period, or to Romani caravans, or the English occultists, or French fortune tellers, or, as one author so colorfully suggested, next slide please, the lost city of Atlantis, where I imagine the demand for waterproof cards has skyrocketed. The history of the tarot deck, one may assume then, is hidden deep in the annals of history, or their origin is so debated as to produce many fantastic legends regarding their birth. This, however, is not the case. While the origins of tarot decks in general remain mostly unknown, the origins of what we might term the occult tarot are actually much better documented. That is, people who are using tarot cards for divination or spiritual purposes. Simply put, many of the individuals responsible for tarot's place in society today were Freemasons, though not all agreed on Masonry's role in their lives and in the world. I'm going to be summarizing the history of tarot today with particular attention paid to 3 Masons who could all be considered key figures in that history. Before we get into that, a brief word for those who are unfamiliar with tarot cards. Next slide, please. Originating sometime in 15th century medieval Italy, that's the 1400s, and finding their way into mainland Europe not long after, a tarot deck consists of 78 playing cards divided into 5 suits. 4 of these suits are very similar to the decks that you and I might be familiar with today. They begin with the ace at the lowest point, and they count up to 10, though the suit signs are different. The Rider-Waite or Smith-Waite deck, which is the deck I'll be focusing on today, uses the suit signs coins, pentacles, shown here, cups, and wands, though other suit signs have been common in other varieties of tarot deck. There is an extra face card in the tarot deck, which is called the page. It is ranked below the jack for 4 face cards in total, and instead of a jack, it is depicted as a knight, then the queen king above it. If this were the only difference between tarot decks and our modern playing cards, it's very unlikely I would be up here discussing them. And it's very likely so many prominent people would have spilled ink regarding them. But the tarot has a further innovation. The tarot deck contains a 5th suit containing 21 cards. These cards, as opposed to the regular suits, which in the medieval decks were typically not very elaborately ornamented, they just showed a number of whatever their suit sign happened to be, similar to how a modern playing card would just show the number of hearts or spades according to its rank. This 5th suit, however, which was called the suit of triumphs, or what was called eventually in French the triomphe, what we would call the trumps. These cards are highly and deeply ornamented. They're typically, back in the day at least, hand-painted, either on vellum or when paper became more available, some of them were hand-drawn. And it is the 21 trump cards which form the basis of the occult interpretation of tarot. Now, when the game of tarot is played, and make no mistake, these decks were primarily used for gaming for a huge part of their history, then the trump suit defeats all the others. For those who are familiar with bridge, or euchre, or whist, it's a very similar concept. One player leads a card, the other players must play a card of the same suit from their hand, and the highest card of that suit, or the highest trump, is the winner of the hand, or the trick. Now, with the beautiful ornamented trump cards, which today you might have heard termed the major arcana, a lot of these scenes which are displayed on them are scenes from medieval life, which would have been familiar to those playing. Next slide, please. This is a series of images from the Tarot de Marseille, which is a very, very beautiful classic deck. You can see here the figure of the Pope represented on the left, a parlor magician plying his trade, le bateleur, in the center, and the skeletal figure of Death, wielding his scythe. It is these fanciful illustrations which form the crux of the occult interpretation on the tarot, and these illustrations which would spark the imagination of one brother of note in our honored fraternity. Allow me to set the scene. The year is 1772, and Paris is buzzing with new ideas, radical philosophies, and the building tension of an overseas revolution. Your ears should be burning. An advertisement appears in Paris, seeking subscriptions to a lengthy work of scholarship, which the author claimed would elucidate the hidden history of the world. The author, next slide please, was a man by the name of Antoine Coeur de Champlain, and the work was Le Monde Primitif, or the primitive world. I would like to apologize in advance to any native French speakers for my pronunciation. Coeur de Champlain, whom we may call brother, was a prominent voice in Parisian politics in defense of Protestantism, which was a dangerous thing to be in Paris at the time. He was a scholar of sorts, though without much regard for historicity or falsifiable evidence. And his scholarship eventually led him to seek out the enlightened circles of his age in the Parisian salons, and more importantly for us, in the Masonic lodges of the day. He was initiated into Freemasonry in the 1770s as a member of the lodge Les Amis Unis, and would eventually move on to become secretary of the much more famous lodge Les Neuf Sœurs, or the Lodge of Nine Sisters, which had as its motto to, quote, fly to the aid of humanity, end quote. This lodge was a hotbed for American revolutionary sentiment and counted among its members the great philosopher Voltaire, Benjamin Franklin, John Paul Jones, and eventually Thomas Jefferson would be placed in charge of their archives, though he would not join the fraternity. In fact, when Voltaire was initiated into our fraternity, it was brother Antoine Coeur de Champlain who conducted him, with Benjamin Franklin on the other side. Now, we know that Coeur de Champlain was an active Mason based on his role as secretary. For anyone who has acted as the secretary of a lodge, you know that that is not a passive role that you can play. And he, in 1777, is on record as having given 7 lectures on symbolism as it relates to the Scottish Rite. His mother lodge would go on to found the Order of the Philelites, and he was one of 3 brothers who were selected to defend the archives and actions of the Parisian lodges when they came into conflict with the Grand Orient, that their proceedings were un-Masonic. This defense was successful, and thanks to Coeur de Champlain and his brothers, the very next master of the Lodge of Nine Sisters would be Benjamin Franklin himself. So, it is clear that Coeur de Champlain was a prominent Freemason and a somewhat respected scholar by his peers. Let us return to the advertisement I mentioned in Le Monde Primitif. Now, what Champlain was claiming was that he had unearthed the secrets of Le Monde Primitif, or the primitive world. This was not a primitive world of rubbing sticks together to create fire and wearing loincloths. This was a unified, enlightened age. Coeur de Champlain theorized, and it was not necessarily an unpopular theory at the time, that all of human culture, all of human religion and human language had a single, unified source. A primitive world, an ancient culture with advanced arts, and if one were able to take the remnants of that culture by analyzing modern culture and modern language and constructing it back to its root, we could reconstruct this primitive world and gain access to all the beautiful knowledge that had been lost to history. This was the theory, at least. In this way, Coeur de Champlain attempted to provide an archaeology of the ancient world, and it was very well received in Paris at the time. There were over 1,000 subscriptions to this work, and 100 of them came from the French royal family themselves. Le Monde Primitif would end uncompleted. It would take almost 10 years for Coeur de Champlain to put out what he was able before he eventually died before finishing the work. But why, then, have I spilled so much ink talking about Coeur de Champlain and his primitive world if I'm supposed to be talking about a deck of playing cards? Because in Volume 8 of Le Monde Primitif, published in 1781, nearly 10 years after that advertisement first appeared, this passage appeared, famous now among tarot scholars, which I will quote in its entirety. Quote, "If one heard it announced that there still exists in our days a work of the ancient Egyptians, one of their books that had escaped the flames that devoured their magnificent libraries, and that contained in a pure form their doctrines concerning interesting subjects, everyone would without a doubt be eager to come to know so precious and so remarkable a book. If it were added that this book was widely disseminated over a large part of Europe, that it has for a number of centuries been in everybody's hands, the surprise would certainly increase. Would it not reach its peak if it were affirmed that it had never been suspected to be Egyptian? That it had been possessed as if it had not been possessed at all? That no one had ever tried to decipher a page of it? That the fruit of a refined wisdom is regarded as a mass of extravagant figures signifying nothing in themselves? Would people not think that the informant was amusing himself by playing on the credulity of his hearers? The fact is, however, quite true. This Egyptian book, the only remnant of their magnificent libraries, exists in our day. It is such a common thing that no scholar has deigned to concern himself with it. No one among us has ever suspected its illustrious origin. This book is, in a word, the game of tarots. Plural, note. There we have it. End quote, by the way. Tarot cards were not the creation of the Italian mercenaries sometime in the 1400s, but rather were the only piece of information to survive the destruction of ancient Egypt. That lost book of Thoth, which contained within all the secrets of the great unified primitive world. You have to understand that at the time, France was gripped by Egyptomania. Omne ignatum pro magnifico, no one really understood Egyptian culture, for the Rosetta Stone had not yet been translated, and so everything from Egypt seemed fantastic and mystical and shrouded in mystery. I mean, the language of hieroglyphics is symbolic in and of itself. And so Coeur de Champlain was capitalizing on exactly this kind of fervor. His evidence for the bizarre assertion that tarot cards came from ancient Egypt? He was at a party, and he saw a group of his friends playing with the tarot cards in the typical game fashion. Noticing the highly ornamented trump cards, which you have seen previously, he immediately declared them to be Egyptian symbols, and snatching the deck from the table, explained to all of the people playing exactly how everyone was Egyptian, having thus expounded it, of course, gospel. It should go without saying we have no record of tarot cards in ancient Egypt. There are no mentions of any cards of the kind before the year 1400, and like I said, Coeur de Champlain was not able to read the Egyptian language either. No one was at the time. As I say, the assertion is fundamentally ridiculous, though there are grander claims that he makes in the Mont Primitif, such as the assertion that the Egyptians would only ever count backwards. And for this reason, many later authors would reverse the order of the tarot cards. You'll find some texts today with reversed card orders based on this theory. Now, he would not popularize the deck for fortune-telling in France. That honor belongs to another gentleman who was not a Mason, and so will receive only a short paragraph, though his contribution to tarot cannot be overstated. Next slide, please. That man is Attila. Not his real name. His surname was Aliette, of which Attila is an anagram. Here we see him hard at work with his tarot cards in front of him. Now, Attila, or Jean-Baptiste Aliette, was a fortune teller of great renown in France at the time. To the tarot, he contributed one of the very first divinatory systems, a method of reading the cards and assigning certain meanings to them, which would allow a person drawing the cards randomly from a deck to understand some aspect of their future, their past, their present, or the will of God, depending on what the inquirer happened to be concerned about at the time. Now, he was never made a Mason, though he professed to hold true Masonry in high esteem, and he was even invited to Masonic functions, such as the aforementioned meeting of the Order of the Philippines. And he was invited because of his apparent perception of having mastered magic, not for any particular charitable or fraternal action he had taken. He introduced new innovations to the deck, revising the order of the cards, returning them to their original form. In the big air quotes here to say, of course, that he was taking a guess at what he believed the Egyptians would have done, which was, well, nothing at all. Now, Attila, and later the famous fortune teller Mademoiselle Lenormand, would popularize the usage of the tarot deck for divination, and it became a very, very popular pastime. It is worth noting that Attila published many manuals on divination, and many of them dealing with all playing cards, not just tarot cards. Other types of decks were used for fortune telling for a very, very long time, and was mostly seen as a diversion. The culture of France at the time was such that it was seen mostly as something that women would do while their husbands were, well, at large. It would not be assigned deeper spiritual or occult significance for some time. Many people were content to accept this product as Egyptian and use them to divert themselves, leaving the occult angles to those scholars who seemed to be interested in that sort of thing. Enter our next brother, Alphonse Louis Constant. Next slide, please. Better known to the world today as Eliphas Levi Zahed, one of the most influential occultists ever to live. Constant, who I will refer to from this point on as Eliphas Levi, as that is the name that he published most of his works under, was originally in line for the Catholic priesthood and even briefly entered a monastery, though it seems that monastic life did not suit him. Neither did celibacy. Though profoundly concerned with spiritual matters, he would not begin writing in earnest on the subject of occultism until about 1850, when he was in his 40s. Levi's influence on what we now term occultism or esotericism cannot be overstated. Much of what we understand of magic, as we call it, or ceremonial magic, or high magic, these are all borrowed from Eliphas Levi. And at a time when charlatans, fortune tellers, and peddlers of magical diversions were running rampant, Levi claimed to hold the great key which would unlock the secrets of ancient magic. Now, borrowing heavily from the authors who came before him, like Paracelsus, Cornelius Agrippa, and Anton Mesmer, to name a few, Levi synthesized a veritable mountain of contradictory and disparate magical theories into what he termed haute magie, or high magic. His influence was extreme, and we'll learn about one of the brothers profoundly influenced by him very shortly. And yes, at one time he was a Mason as well. Levi seems to have had a complicated relationship with our fraternity, as he was initiated on March 14, 1861, and made a master later the same year in the Lodge Rose du Parfait Silence, or rows of perfect silence. But he would either leave the fraternity or be expelled from it only a few months later. In his reception speech upon being initiated, Levi is quoted to have said, quote, "I come to bring to you your lost traditions, the exact knowledge of your signs and symbols, and consequently to show you the goal for which your association was constituted." End quote. Had quite a head on his shoulders, did Levi at the time, and you see he theorized that all Masonic symbols, and indeed the symbolism of the tarot as well, had their origins in Kabbalah, that ancient system of Jewish mysticism, which has so many symbolic allusions according to it as well. Kabbalah fit very neatly with the tarot, and one of Levi's great innovations was to combine the two systems, taking the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, as in Kabbalah, and the 21 trumps, plus the card the Fool, which sits outside, and assigning a Hebrew letter to each card. But back to his Masonic activity, Levi sought reconciliation between Masons and Catholics. He grew up Catholic, as I had said, and he had a complicated relationship with Catholicism his whole life, but he sought reconciliation between the two groups at a time when tensions were really high. Remember that we're not very far removed from In Eminentia Apostolatus, that 1738 papal bull banning Catholics from becoming Masons. To quote Levi, quote, "To reconcile Freemasonry and Catholicism, what would be necessary? Bringing mutual distrust to a halt and the cultivation of mutual understanding. Remembering this great axiom of occult philosophy, harmony results from the analogy of opposites." This attempt at reconciliation would not go over well, and it seems that Levi left the lodge meeting after receiving some pushback from his audience, and he would never again return to Masonry. He left the craft with these words, quote, "I ceased being a Freemason at once because the Freemasons, excommunicated by the Pope, did not believe in tolerating Catholicism. I thus separated from them to protect my freedom of conscience and to avoid their reprisals, perhaps excusable, if not legitimate, but certainly inconsequential, because the essence of Freemasonry is the tolerance of all beliefs." Now, this tension between Catholicism and Masonry will show up later. Tarot cards were central to Levi's unified theory of magic. He, like Attila before him, placed high stock in the symbolic value of the tarot and said that it occupied a central position in magical science. However, unlike Attila, Levi would not focus on divination as being the primary purpose of the deck. Levi, though he considered it possible, and in fact stated that an imprisoned person with nothing but a tarot deck would be able to acquire the knowledge of every nation in only a few short years, which one scholar commented is a pity that that fact is not known to scientists today, who spend so much money on their research, when they could spend about $15 and acquire the tarot deck. I credit that one, I believe Michael Dummett, the beautiful scholar who said that. Now, let's see. Pardon me, finding my spot here. Yeah, so, he accused Attila of having, quote, degraded the ancient work discovered by Coeur de Gévelin into the domain of vulgar magic and fortune-telling by cards, end quote. For Levi, the images of the major arcana, that word was not in use at the time just yet, the images of the major arcana contain symbols which could unlock the secrets of magic and point to a unified occult history. This calling was therefore much higher than simple divination. Unlike his predecessors who were inclined to read hermetic alchemical symbolism into the cards, Levi contributed the synthesis of Kabbalah, which I have already spoken about. You'll remember also that synthesis between Kabbalah and Freemasonry, which was not well received in his mother lodge. With Kabbalah and tarot so thoroughly combined by so prominent an occultist, the tarots truly seem to be suffused with magical significance. Levi would also continue in the tradition of occult scholars and rectify the order of the tarot cards, altering their numbering and symbolism to return them to their original form. It's primarily due to this man and his writings that we owe the modern state of tarot being what it is, but there were many different variations of tarot deck at this time, such as the Tarot de Marseille, which you saw previously, or the Petit Attila, or the Little Attila, which was in circulation among the fortune tellers of France. Now, the symbols on the cards were held to be significant and archetypal, but they didn't pack quite the same punch. There was a certain aesthetic that was maybe lacking in the tarot at that time that made it so their symbols had not migrated into our collective unconscious. It would require one more Brother Mason to bring this tarot deck into the next age, and this gentleman is known as Arthur Edward Waite. Now, Arthur Edward Waite created a deck which is now known as the Rider-Waite or the Smith-Waite deck, because it features illustrations by the great artist Pamela Coleman Smith called Pixie. And it is these images that have become iconic for most practitioners and general folks who are interested in tarot today. If you don't believe me, Google search the word tarot. When you get out of here, go to images and count exactly how many of those display the Rider-Waite cards. It's likely you're thinking of them right now, whenever anyone says the word tarot. Next slide, please. Arthur Edward Waite. According to one anti-Masonic author, quote, "No one has contributed as much as he did to the propagation of mystico-magic among the English occultists in or out of Freemasonry." Waite also has the honored distinction of having the second best mustache on this stage. Born in Brooklyn, but raised in England, Waite was fascinated with symbolism and ritual from a very young age, and his main outlet for this was Roman Catholicism. Though it does not seem he had quite the same conflict that Levi had regarding that upbringing. As he grew, he gradually distanced himself from the church, and his hunger for ritual sought other avenues. He became fascinated with the writings of Eliphas Levi, and eventually his occultist leanings, together with many publications on the subject. In fact, Waite is one of the most prominent translators of Levi's works from French into English, caused him to seek admittance to the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. At this time, late 1800s, early 1900s in England, secret societies flourished, many of them based on Freemasonry. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn was based partly on Freemasonry, partly on some Rosicrucian orders, and it had many celebrities, authors, and occultists as part of its repertoire. William Butler Yeats, Arthur Machen, Sax Rohmer, Algernon Blackwood, Aleister Crowley. It is a star-studded list, if ever there was one. The Golden Dawn claimed to administer a degree system derived from a ciphered manuscript and under the authority of a higher order of secret chiefs. And one of its key fascinations was tarot cards. But what about Masonry? Waite was critical and reductive of Freemasonry early on in his career, seeing the craft as being a beautiful system of morality, but nothing more. Now, the stance changed later in his life after a group of French Catholics began to level accusations of Satanism at the craft, and Waite, though a non-Mason, vigorously leapt to the defense of the Masonic lodges of his day. His defense was so successful that many Masons reached out to him and professed their interest in his work and expressed their thanks for his defense. This caused him to change his perception of the craft. They were not just a group of men getting together to talk about morality and shake each other's hands. It seemed that many of them were truly involved in the spiritual life of the craft at the time. Now, he became interested in progressing through the higher Masonic degrees through his study of Louis-Claude de Saint-Martin, the unknown philosopher, and the central figure of what we call today as Martinism. On 19th of September 1901, at the age of 43, he was initiated in Runnymede Lodge number 2430 at Wraysbury in Buckinghamshire. He had little care for the lower degrees, seeking what he saw as the deeper symbolic truths of the higher degrees. Once, when he showed up late for the installation of a new master, he was made steward in his absence, which, quote, caused the meeting to be very nearly intolerable. Despite this, he became very active in collecting degrees and would travel all over the world seeking obscure ritual. He would write of his belief that, quote, there is a masonry which is behind masonry, and not commonly communicated in lodges, though at the right time it is made known to the right person, end quote. The noted Mason and esotericist Manly Hall, who many will be familiar with, claims that Waite as, quote, claims that Waite had a deep bias for all things English and rejected American Masonic forms, American philosophy, and generally anything that didn't originate from England. He spoke of Waite as, quote, an individual with a good scholarly mind and a powerful body of preconceptions. Mr. Waite reasons from conclusions and not toward them, end quote. Having quoted Hall here, it is worth noting that he himself seemed to endorse the view of the cards originating in ancient Egypt with the Romani people, neither of which originated in ancient Egypt, and so we should take his criticism here with a grain of salt. Waite did tend to be more of a skeptic than his contemporaries in occultism. Now, regardless of which direction his conclusions came from, in 1910, Waite became master of running a lodge, and the very same year, he would release his very own customized, commissioned deck of tarot cards. Alongside fellow Golden Dawn member and artist Pamela Coleman Smith, who I've spoken of before, next slide please, Waite had commissioned a tarot deck to be made featuring entirely new changes to the art and the symbolism. It was first published in 1909 by the company Rider, hence why it is called the Rider-Waite deck, but was updated in a larger print and released in 1910. Waite, in detailing the symbols and images which he wanted on the card, trusted Coleman Smith to supply the art for not only the major arcana, but every single card in the deck. All of these 78 cards have unique illustrations, each with symbolic meaning, which Waite very helpfully lined out for us. This represented a huge leap forward to the tarot, and it is the images of the Rider-Waite deck as illustrated by Pamela Coleman Smith that so commonly come to people's minds today when asked about the tarot. Like I said, search for the word tarot anywhere, and it's likely you're going to find an image very much like this one. Now, it was not the only new version of the tarot at that time period. There were many authors writing on the subject, such as Papus's Tarot of the Bohemians, but this one has had the most staying power. Waite's deck had one other thing going for it, and that was that 2 years after it was published, he released a book, an updated guidebook called The Pictorial Key to the Tarot. And this explained the symbolism on the cards and provided divinatory meanings for all of the minor arcana, the suit cards. Notably, it also features a section on tarot history, which we have discovered is a little bit of a hot topic at this time. A lot of people had disagreements. Waite actually isolates himself from his contemporaries here by seeming to get the facts straight. He maintains that there cannot be an Egyptian origin for tarot cards, and correctly cites that there are no records before the 15th century. Now, despite this, he devotes his full effort towards the symbolism on this new pack of tarot cards, and these illustrations, as we can see here with their vibrant colors, have stuck in our zeitgeist. It is a much closer view to a sober historical fact than in Le Monde Primitif, but Waite was not always the perfect scholar, and occasionally, as Hall suggested, his own biases did show through. But the rest, as they say, is history. Far from remaining the exclusive purview of French fortune tellers and English occultists, tarot cards have become a key piece in many people's spiritual lives. They've been incorporated into neo-pagan traditions like Asatru and Wicca. Many people will incorporate them with their own religious identities, such as in Santeria, you can find decks for Jewish tarot, for the Catholic tarot even, and I have a deck by Patricio Diaz Silva of the Masonic tarot. If you visit the library as well, you'll see a beautiful display of tarot cards there, right off to the left as you walk in. Cleverly, the last thing you showed me too. Fantastic little thing. Now, Antoine Coeur-de-Lion, Eliphas Levi, and Arthur Waite all played key roles in how and why tarot cards came to be such a cultural force. Each had a unique relationship to Masonry, but all were united by a fascination with the language of symbolism, the significance of ritual, and all saw secrets locked within the tarot. I would like to conclude by exploring some of the symbolism on the first two cards of the Rider-Waite deck, the Magician and the High Priestess. Final slide, please. We have here the Magician and the High Priestess as rendered in the Smith-Waite deck. Now, first, we'll start with the Magician. We see here roses and lilies rendered as common wildflowers. Now, according to Waite, this is to show the culture of aspiration. As the common wildflower becomes the rose and the lily, the flower of the evening and of the morning, so too do we seek to perfect ourselves by study of the tarot. We see as well the gentleman standing here. This is the Magician. His working tools lie on the table in front of him, and they are the four suit signs of the tarot: swords, cups, pentacles, and wands, though he holds another wand in his hand. His stance is notable. This is a stance that would be familiar to a scholar of Hermeticism or general occultism. It is meant to denote the occult aphorism, as above, so below. Now, this is to say that as the world above, that is to say, the higher spiritual world, that which we cannot perceive, as it is the cause of which our world is the effect, by observing the world which lays in front of us here, we might, by virtue of the study of liberal arts and sciences, for example, come to understand the plan of the great architect. Therefore, as above, in the house not built with hands, so below, here, on earth and in our lodges. The lemniscate, this infinity symbol, also a sideways number 8, rests atop his head. This is to show the infinite quality of life, that is to say, the eternity of the soul, that after death there will not be a cessation to this culture of aspiration. 8 in Martinism is also considered one of the numbers of Jesus Christ. On his belt, we see an Ouroboros, a snake biting its own tail. This is to show that the culture of attainment itself is infinite as well. These interpretations, by the way, I am borrowing from Waite's pictorial key to the tarot. Now, other authors, such as the anonymous author of Meditations on the Tarot, A Journey into Christian Hermeticism, have suggested that the Magician is the key to the whole of the tarot, because in that stance, and in what the Magician represents, the whole truth of the tarot is contained. That is to say, the Magician asks us to accept this hypothesis, that by studying the world below, what we have in front of us, we may gain some understanding of the world above. That is to say, we must accept that all things are connected. And of course, if we have the tarot deck in our hand, we must, because these are symbols, and this is a symbolic language. By virtue of the fact that we are able to take a symbol which has nothing to do with the original idea, for example, a cross, or a lemniscate, or a square, or a compass, by virtue that we are able to extract deeper meaning from that, this proves that our world is inherently interconnected, and therefore that by studying these symbols, we may gain spiritual knowledge that we would not have gained if we had simply been told it. The Magician, therefore, is one of the most important cards in the tarot. I have a beautiful lapel pin showing this figure right here. Now, to move on to the High Priestess. The High Priestess sits in loose rows, flanked by 2 pillars, B and J, which will be very familiar to many of the people here. They mark that this temple is a very particular temple indeed, and we see here that the veil guarding the temple is embroidered with palms and pomegranates. At her feet rests a crescent moon. She wears a solar cross around her chest, according to Waite, though a solar cross is typically circumscribed by a circle. That is to say, a cross representing not only the church, but the sun. The moon sits atop her three-piece diadem, and she holds a volume of sacred law on her lap, half hidden. The pillars and the veiled temple suggest that there is some aspect which is still hidden from us. The volume of sacred law, written as Torah here, missing its H, that will appear again on the card Wheel of Fortune, is half hidden by the robe. We might learn from this that though we have been revealed certain things by the tarot, we are yet a few material points in the dark respecting some of the secrets there. And this is reinforced by the veil and the fact that she sits in front of the door. This stymies us. The person approaching the tarot and going through the cards in order will be entranced by the magician who seems to possess the power to understand their symbols, as, of course, all the symbols are laid out here. The expression is confident, he's smiling easily, the grip is loose, and so we might believe that we're in for an easy time before the high priestess stymies us and shows us that there are still things which are yet to be revealed. In fact, Waite, in his pictorial key to the tarot, suggests that someone who possesses a tarot deck possesses only 1/3 of the requisite knowledge. The other 2/3 must be gained from initiation into those organizations which have passed down those teachings. For Waite, that was the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, possibly the Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia, or SRIA, and, of course, Freemasonry. Now, her expression is calm as well, and as we will see on the previous cards, if you have time to peruse them yourselves, there's much deeper symbolism that is at play here. But for the moment, we are left standing in front of the entrance to a temple that we do not have the proper signs or tokens to enter. And so here is where I will leave it and open the floor to any questions that we may have.
So if you have a question, raise your hand, wait for me to come over to you, and I will hold the mic in front of you. Please don't grab it.
I noticed of course, the lilies on the magician. Is the magician holding a baton like a marshal?
I had thought exactly the same thing. That baton, as we might see from our marshals, or the scepter, could very well be. There are a few things which give me some hesitation in saying yes. So what would give me to say yes, possibly, is that it is not the wand of the suit of wands. There are many, many tarot decks which depict the magician as holding the wand absent from the table. This one does not, and that is notable. It is an entirely different kind of scepter. Typically the scepter to represent divine authority. Some of the other tarot cards will hold scepters to show the same thing as our marshals do. Now, what makes me hesitant to say that is that Waite was not just influenced by Freemasonry, but also by many deep symbolic traditions of obscure rites, Rosicrucian rites, Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and all sorts of other things. And so, whether or not he's borrowing symbolism from those, I cannot say exactly, but I would say I had exactly the same thought, and I believe if that is what you see on viewing this card, it is a useful thought to be having when it comes to studying the symbolism.
The reason why I asked is because that position is usually the position to proceed in a certain direction, in which case he's pointing down but emphasizing up. And of course it's in a similar stance as the Baphomet card that you had earlier that everybody, in the Taxel hoax lost their minds about. But I think it's quite interesting the whole juxtaposition. I've been looking at decks for years, and it wasn't until I became a Mason. It's like, wait a minute, what's going on here? Thank you for answering those questions.
Well, of course, and I think you pointed out something that Eliphas Levi pointed out when he said that one of the true occult aphorisms, harmony, results in the analogy of opposites. And we see that here, so thank you very much for pointing that out. Great question. Any other questions tonight? There.
What do the B and the J mean on the pillars of the high priestess?
So those letters denote that these are the pillars written about in the Bible, which are the pillars which flank the entrance to Solomon's temple. And so we read about how in the Bible that temple was constructed with very particular measurements, and then eventually, of course, the temple was destroyed. In this case, we might see weight as using those to represent that the high priestess is guarding some ancient wisdom, using the biblical imagery there. There are also other Masonic meanings to these symbols too, though I am going to err on the side of caution.
Here in New York, we are open to say it because it's public knowledge and it is in the Bible, so it could be up to you. And coming from the Grand Lecturer, I'm close friends with him too. You may say it if you'd like.
Beautiful. These pillars are named Boaz and Jacob, and they have, like I said, particular allusions in Freemasonry, but that is what the B and the J stand for. And like I said, that is, I believe in, is it Kings? Is the construction of the temple? I betray my biblical ignorance at this stage. And so, thank you very much for the question. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Lovely, thank you. Any more questions?
I have one. It might
Yes.
be a long question. Not that I ask is usually short anyway, but except my height. There was a book by Carl Jung, not a Mason, called Psychiatry and Alchemy. In it, he describes that there are some times when he gets to a certain place with a patient where he has to abandon traditional psychological analysis, and he has to start using the symbols to access the collective archetypes in the collective unconscious. And so I have heard that reference to one of the reasons why in the Masonic ceremonies we use symbols so that it could waken up the subconscious of the individual, and so we could communicate these great truths without the theological controversies and the dogmatic conflicts. Would you say that there's a connection for that explanation with the tarot cards as well?
I would absolutely, and many, many authors have connected the tarot to the Jungian collective unconscious. This idea that we have a shared set of symbols that we fundamentally understand as people. I would say in this case that the tarot cards are slightly different from the Jungian collective unconscious, which aims at, and my admittedly poor understanding of Jung, aims at looking at those elements of culture which are universal between people, and those archetypal forms, whereas the tarot is designed not to be intelligible by everyone, as a universal symbol would be, but to be intelligible only by those who have either passed through initiatory rites, as mentioned before, or who have studied the symbolism present on them. So I would say that the principle remains the same, in that by using the language of symbolism, we hit at a point of our brain which is not the discursive mind. The meditation on an image, for example, of the cross, or the Star of David, or on a piece of sacred geometry, a mandala, however you like it, that can lend itself to meditation and lead to certain revelations about oneself, which do not come from the head, but rather from the heart. That is the idea behind the tarot. And this actually gives me a good opportunity to say what I was going to say on my final conclusion, which is that many people use tarot decks for different reasons today. If you go to a tarot reader and ask them, "Will you tell me what will happen to me tomorrow?" I do not think you would receive the same answer from everybody. Many people will spread the cards differently. They'll use different decks. For some, it is a tool of divination to see the future. For some, it is a book of symbols to be meditated on, from the very beginning to the end, and to be read in order. Now, when some do tarot readings and randomly draw the cards, they seek to apply these symbols to their lives in ways that they would not normally, in the same way that as we go about our day, we are reminded of such symbols as the gavel, or the level, or the square, when it comes to monitoring our own actions. This takes that symbolism and brings in many, many more elements and organizes it in such a way as to be read from front to back, so to speak. There are some scholars who have hypothesized that tarot cards originated as their occult interpretation in Masonic lodges, but I have only seen really a few Masonic authors say this, and it does not seem to be the general opinion of scholarship as a whole. All to say, excellent connection to Jung, and I believe there is exactly something there.
Thank you for that excellent response.
Just a quick comment. In your studies of tarot, you might want to look into the other deck that A.E. Waite created. Tabitha Cicero of Golden Dawn fame brought them to New York and she gave a lecture. So Waite had another tarot deck that was even more esoteric than the one that we're familiar with, just for future study, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I chose to focus on the Rider-Waite tonight based on how popular it is, but some of the more esoteric decks, and there are some that are very popular out there that are really, that have enjoyed quite a wide circulation. Some of them get to the point where, oh my goodness, to get through this I'm going to have to get another couple of bachelor's degrees or something like that, another degree in history or something. But that is an excellent point as well, and I do encourage those listening as well to check out some of the other tarot decks available and to compare the symbolism, especially if they're from the same time period. Any further questions before I conclude?
Yes, we have one over here.
Yes, of course.
Non-religion, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Regarding on the magician side, you explained the roses and the lilies, the evening and the morning. On the high priestess side, we have the palms and the pomegranate. Can you explore sort of what those meanings are, why they're present?
So Waite does not go into detail on the palm fronds or the pomegranates, and so I'm hesitant to put too many words into his mouth. I will say my own thoughts and what other scholars have said. The pomegranate, for the hardiness of its seed, is often regarded as a symbol of strength. It can also be regarded mythologically as a symbol of time passing or even of mortality, if we remember the myth of Persephone and Hades. Now, the palm fronds, of course, have meaning in Christian symbolism too, in the practice of Palm Sunday. Some authors have suggested that as a whole, what this card represents is the esoteric church. That is, the church that knelt at Jesus' breast and heard the beating of his heart, versus the Church of Peter, as they say, the head of the exoteric church. While a later card, which is called the Hierophant in the Rider-Waite deck, or as you saw in the beginning, was called the Pope in the Marseille deck, that represents the leader of the exoteric church. For many people, this here represents that esoteric teaching, the deeper symbolic meaning behind what is communicated in the churches of the day. Now, for Waite also, this figure represents the divine feminine, the Shekinah in Kabbalah, or the wisdom, which is spoken of in the book of Proverbs, personified and feminized, as being the divine portion of, or rather the feminine portion of the divine. And so the palm fronds and the pomegranates remain partially mysterious to us, at least in Waite's own words, but we have some enlightenment from other authors there. A fantastic question. Thank you.
There's also some connection, and some Masons may know some other possibles. There are probably many interpretations. That one of the interpretations of the lily is purity, and the rose also hold blood and beauty at the same time, which might be the purification they're referring to in the animus, which is the magician, to get to the anima, which the pomegranate, one of the interpretations of the symbolism is unity. Possibly, as the first word for God in the Bible, Elohim, kind of one interpretation is singularity and multiplicity at the same time, as in becoming the stones of the house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens.
Beautiful, brother, and thank you for adding the Masonic portion. I'm new to the craft myself. I was only initiated just last year. There are still some things that I tend to be more cautious about when it comes to speaking of. So thank you for elucidating that for us. And you point out once again the harmony of the analogy of opposites. And in fact, the divine name commonly spoken as Elohim, when the Tanakh is read aloud, the divine name will appear on 2 other tarot cards later in the Rider-Waite set in its Hebrew form, Yod-He, Vav-He. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for attending.